26. Luke chapter 17, beginning with verse number 26. And as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise also as it was in the days of Lot, they did eat, and they drank, and they bought, and they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven, and destroyed them all. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. Our Father in heaven, we are grateful for the privilege and blessing to be in your house. Lord, for those who've lost loved ones, we ask for the comfort of your Spirit. We ask for the peace of knowing that our loved one is in heaven. We ask for the sick that you will heal their bodies and guide the doctors as they work, and procedures and medication will be effective. And as we open your word today, we ask, Lord, for your guidance of clarity of thought and open hearts, that we might be a better people and that we might be the kind of servants that you would have us to be. Now forgive us and use us today. For Christ's sake I pray. Amen. It's interesting, isn't it? As in the days of Noah, so shall it also be. So shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. Of course, this is his eschatological discourse concerning the end time, isn't it? But there is the point that what happens close to this time, and that is the revelation of the Son of Man. I got some pictures, and dear ones, we need to be careful about such pictures. There was also one where a woodpecker had punched holes all through the ark. Then there's this one. And, it's interesting how people try to interpret the size of this thing. All right? In Europe, this is the ark, by the way, in case you're wondering. But in Europe, this vessel goes from place to place. It is a museum where people can walk through. But that's supposed to be the ark. It's interesting, isn't it? Okay? And then we've all seen the Ark encounter in Kentucky, and we are told that these are men who are supposed to be experts in ark construction, and thus that's their interpretation. And those of us who have been there, and I stood at the front of that thing and looked down, and it is huge. It is huge. And on the inside, we stood at one end, and down the hallway, I could go clear to the end of it, and my goodness, it was big. Okay? Now, this is more of an accurate rendering, I think, than what many have. Then there's a picture. This is the ark, and some took the dimensions of the ark, 75 feet high, 45 feet wide, and 450 feet long. There was no sail, there was no rudder. It was simply designed to float, wasn't it? Have you ever been asked, how can all the animals in all the world fit inside of such a small vessel? Well, animals were a little bit different back then than they are now, aren't they? And so are we a little different than what we were back then, as far as man is concerned. But the ark had its purpose. Now, let's turn to Genesis chapter 6, because he mentions as in the days of Noah. So let's go to Genesis chapter 6. And as you remember, man began to multiply on the face of the earth. Some would have us to believe that man wasn't very bright back in those days. Not a lot of intelligence, because evolutionists try to tell us that man's brains had not fully developed, and they go through all this stuff. Well, in the days of Noah, it was a thriving society. Okay? And it came to pass, when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and when the daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took wives of all that they chose. How many of you heard someone teach that these sons of God were angels? Okay, no, they were not angels. They were of the household of faith. They were saved men that saw daughters of men. If you remember in the days of Israel, when the kings got together and decided, how can we stop Israel from conquering the land? One suggested that we'll have our daughters marry their sons, and their sons our daughters, and our sons their daughters, and we'll let nature take its course. And sure enough, when they started marrying outside of the faith, Israel collapsed because of it. What was the name of the judge that saw some woman outside of Israel, and despite his parents begging him not to do this, do not take her as your wife, stay away from them, he took her anyway, did he not? And he fell because it was a trap. What do we got here? The sons of God, daughters of men, and from there we go. Verse 3, and the Lord said, my spirit shall always strive with man, for in that he is also flesh, and his days shall be 120. And there were giants in the earth in those days. That word giants is translated Goliath. How many of you remember Goliath? The same word that describes him as a giant is the same word here. So they were tall. 9 feet's a pretty good tall. All right? I think there's a basketball star that's close to that, isn't he? And if you can't rise in business to look down on people, you can also be born tall enough that you can just look down on people. But giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children unto them, and the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Now what I want you to see here in verse 5, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that the imagination of his thought of his heart was only evil continually. What is leading up to the condition of the heart? Okay? One, you have the sons of God marrying the daughters of men. A departure from the faith. You have households that become more involved with their own activities than being concerned about the worship of God. Chapter number 5 and verse number 22. Chapter 5 and verse number 22. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Brass and iron. This is chapter 4. We ought to put the numbers in the right spot in this Bible. You know what I'm saying? Chapter 4 and verse 22. Instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. You have the Industrial Revolution. Now, after the flood, the people that are known for iron, making iron weapons, was the Philistines. They were known. Before that, they used brass. Brass is not a real strong metal to use. And so when they got iron, that made a game changer. So they started making their chariots, swords, spears, everything started to become out of iron. But before the flood, you have an industrial revolution. You have people making iron and brass implements. You have a society that is thriving and involved. And guess what? God is not in there anywhere. They're busy about their lives. They're busy about what they want to do, where they want to go. In fact, it reached such a pitch that their imagination, what they began to consider and dream of, began to spiritually hurt people. I have nothing against technology. I think it's wonderful. Nothing against cell phones. I use one myself. But let us be careful that we don't allow technology to separate us even more. When young people send hate texts to one another, just vicious stuff. When someone takes a video game that is so violent in its presentation and begins to wonder if that is real life. Something's messed up. Now, we already have the breakdown of the family, do we not? So now we have technology that continues. In fact, it's growing faster than our pocketbooks can handle. Right? Is that right? They're always coming out with something new and something better. Let's be careful that we keep that stuff in its proper place because it separates people. Okay? Amen. Now, as I said, I have one. I probably use it more than I should. But I have one. But sometimes a face-to-face is much better than a text over a phone. Okay? You can't very well send best wishes and love over a text and make it real. But the technology was growing, the civilization was growing. They did not have their homes in caves and was wielding sticks to fight off animals. In fact, they began to imagine, that there was a couple of men that met in a garage and started working on a computer. Back before when they started, computers were separated. You had Atari and you had IBM, and they were never compatible. Okay? You either had to buy the one or buy the other. Well, these two men figured out a way that you could combine them. All right? And oh boy, did not the computer business explode when they began to realize. And technology. I love technology whenever doctors are able to talk to somebody in Chicago from here and they're able to work together to talk about a person's problem and what type of treatment needs to be done. All this, there's a lot of good stuff here. Just as much as there's a lot of bad stuff. Okay? A lot of bad stuff. Some churches have a screen, something like ours, except theirs is a lot larger. And they will go in and they will hook that screen up and listen to the pastor of another church way off as he brings the message. They will have the entire service, or you sing along with him, he preaches that morning, the whole thing, and they call them satellite churches. And he doesn't even have to be there. Okay? So, nothing wrong with technology as long as we're careful. You know, it's much like riches or money, isn't it? We need to control it instead of it controlling us. So they were involved. They were coming up with things. They were involved in things. But what happened? Their imagination turned to evil. Okay? Fleshly things, fleshly satisfaction. Let's go to Romans chapter number 1. Romans chapter number 1. Down to verse number 26. I'm using a new Bible this morning, so maybe that's the reason we are sometimes on different pages. Romans chapter number 1, down to verse number 26. For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections. For even their women did change the natural use of that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of a woman, burned in the lust one toward another. Men with men, working to that which is unseemly, receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet, even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind, to a corrupt, evil mind, to do those things which are not convenient, which are not proper, which should not be done. Does that sound like our society today? Okay? Well, one of these days, what do you think? One of these days, Christian people ought to get together and say, we demand to be recognized just like other minorities in this world. Right? We demand. But they graduated to the point to where lifestyles, they call them lifestyles nowadays, and they call them all sorts of things. But listen, anything that God calls evil, it's still evil today. It's inappropriate today. But their imagination was only evil continually. They were absorbed with this stuff. Okay? Absorbed with this stuff until a point to where God was not in the picture. I remember when the Supreme Court voted to remove the Ten Commandments from this public building, where they had Ten Commandments out in front of a court building. They voted to have it removed. It took the Supreme Court to make that decision while they're sitting under an edifice of the Ten Commandments above them. All right? And everybody's screaming a separation of church and state. Let's try to get religion out of all these things so that we can fill it with something else. That's what they did. Amen. Okay? Rome was a modern city of its day. It too had industrial revolution. It too was growing. Somewhere around 2 million or more lived in Rome, and it was the epicenter of society. It was the capital of the Roman Empire. And I mean, their indulgences and their eccentricities was legendary. But they pushed out God. Okay? I'm not going to read all of these. Let's go to Matthew chapter 15, 19 and 20. What defiles a man? Okay? Do you know your disciples went about eating corn without washing their hands? So Jesus is explaining what truly defiles a man. Okay? And it doesn't involve whether or not he washes his hands, does it? Let's start with verse number 18. But those things which proceed out of the mouth cometh forth from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornication, theft, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashen hands defileth not a man. Isn't it interesting that society thinks if we educate, relocate, if we do everything we can to change their environment, that they will change? And it doesn't work, does it? Okay? Because the essential element of life change is the heart. You get the heart, you got them. Did not the Lord take our heart? Okay? He saved us, saved our souls, and He asked us to give Him our hearts, and once our hearts were there, everything else fell into place. Okay? I think that's the discourse in John chapter 20 when Jesus was asking Peter, "Peter, do you love me?" "Well, of course I do." Well, that would be the same thing. Once in a while, I'll tell one of these men, I'll say, "Brother, I love you." That's the level of love that Jesus was speaking about to Peter. We do care for one another because we're brothers in the Lord. But that's not what the Lord was asking, was it? Okay? And He asked a second time, "Peter, do you love me?" "Well, of course I do." But the third time was the one that Jesus was trying to really nail down, if you will, Peter's heart when He said, "Peter, do you love me?" "Lord, you know that I love you. You know all things." Well, Peter would certainly have a lot of struggles, would he not, with what that idea was of loving the Lord. So yes, they grew in evil continually to the point to where it grieved the Lord that He even made man. And He decided that He'll give him 120 years. And then turns to a man named Noah who found grace in the eyes of the Lord and told him, "I want you to build an ark, and that will house your family and some animals, and I want it done." Okay, no doubt he looked like he was out of his cotton-picking mind. Sometimes, my dear beloved, if we're serving the Lord, people think we're nuts. Okay, that's okay. But God said, "This is it." And when the fountains of the deep were broken up, and the earth began to spew water straight up, and the heavens began to pour down, we're not talking about a heavy shower, we're talking about a deluge of water pouring down upon the earth. And it still took 40 days to cover it. Okay? But only those in the ark were safe, weren't they? Sometimes scientists say, you cannot build a civilization on 3 people. God did. Didn't He? Well, let's consider the condition of the heart. Okay? Jeremiah said the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. And that is our original state, isn't it? We are sinners by nature and by practice. We allow things to take us. A lot of people don't even understand what love is. Okay? Understand what love is. I remember an occasion of hearing about a couple that was in a severe car accident. And he was hurt pretty bad, but his wife was hurt a little worse than he was. And so he finally got to the place where he could go in and see her. And she had scars on her face. And her mouth was kind of turned, And he walked up to her and he said, "Honey, I love you." Well, of course. Amen? People act like that's so strange. "Honey, I love you." And he reached over and he began to try to move his lips to match hers so he could kiss her. A lot of people don't know what love is. I was called to a house one time, and this sister told me, she said, "Pastor, he doesn't love me." Why would you say something like that? Because he won't do what I want. I said, "Sister, that's not love. That's a chain. That's not love. Love is giving. It is not taking." Okay? Another man told me, "Well, I investigated the woman that I was going to marry." I said, "Investigated? Well, I wanted to know what she could bring to the marriage." "Well, you ought to be thankful she brought herself, first of all, because you're no great prize." Love works through many things, and it evolves over time. It grows richer and deeper over time. And my goodness, isn't it something of a trip? Samuel went down to the house of Jesse, and those sons came up, strapping young men, and Samuel said, "It's not him." Finally went through all of them that were there. "Do you have any other sons?" "Well, I've got the run of the family out taking care of the sheep. That's about all he's good for. He's taking care of the sheep." "Bring him." And up walks David. And David, God tells Samuel, he's the one. Don't look on how he looks. Don't think about his mental processes. Because the Lord looks on the heart, didn't he? Now all of us will agree that David made some poor choices. Even as king, he made some poor choices. But one thing's for certain, he had a heart that belonged to God. And when he did sin, did he not repent of that sin? When he did sin, in numbering of Israel, did he not say, "I'll put our fate into the hands of the Lord. I will not choose what chastisement Israel will receive. I will trust you to make that choice." That's a man with a heart that belongs to God. And that's what's written, a man after God's own heart, Acts 13:22. The Lord is not looking for perfect people. He's simply asking for our hearts. If he has our hearts, he's got everything else. You know, I sat in a room with a family. The church was closing. They had no other choice but to close it. Some of them looked at the older members and started saying, "What are we going to do? There's not another church we can go to. There's not another scriptural church anywhere around this area. What are we going to do? How can we serve the Lord if we don't have a church?" Okay? Well, God heard that prayer, and it was arranged, and next thing you know, we were in a nice building serving the Lord and teaching the truth. Folks, it's our hearts. When the Lord has our hearts, he's got us. Okay? In the Lord's work, we call that a burden, don't we? When he burdens our hearts. Proverbs chapter 23 and verses 5 and 6. I need to move along. Proverbs chapter 23, verses 5 and 6. The wise man Solomon writes, "Wilt thou set thine eyes upon that which is not? For riches certainly make thyself wings. They fly away as an eagle toward heaven. Eat thou not the bread of him that hath an evil eye, neither desire thou his dainty meats. For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. Eat and drink, saith he to thee, but his heart is not with thee." You ever known people that they want to associate you simply because of advantage? If you can provide advantage for them to advance or do something or buy something, then they're interested and it's good to know you. But the minute you say, "I'm not interested," well, that's it. Okay? I'm not sure why it's called ghosting. Is that what? That's a cell phone thing, isn't it? Ghosting. But they don't want to say anything else. They don't want to be around you any longer because you're not involved in what they want to do. Solomon is saying, stay away from such people. Be careful who you call friend. Okay? The only friends I've ever had has been among the people of God. That was the only ones. Romans 10, "For with the heart man believeth unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation." It takes the heart. All right? Around the religious circles, we use the word possession and confession. A lot of people confess they know Jesus, but they are not in possession of salvation. Okay? It's much like Mother Church when she decided that everybody will be Christian. So we'll baptize all the babies and we'll make them all church members from that point forward. That's what they do. But where's the heart? Okay? Where's the heart? "For the word of God is quick, powerful, sharper than any two-edged sword." That's true, isn't it? "Piercing even to the dividing of soul and spirit, of joint and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart." So does that mean the Lord knows what we're going to do before we do it? Okay? He knows where our heart is. So yes, my friends, this world has captured the hearts of so many. But it's only temporary. Nothing in this world is permanent. In fact, this planet is not permanent either. It's a temporary living space that will one day be consumed with the fire of God's judgment. If we desire peace, if we desire presence, if we desire power, that's all brought about from the Spirit of God that lives within us. And the more we love Him, the more He will reveal Himself to us. He doesn't push His way through. He's not going to break the door down to be a part of our lives. But if we invite Him in, He will be there. Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 29. "Oh, that there was such an heart in them, that they would fear me and keep all my commandments always, that it might be well with them and with their children forever." Every time Israel had obeyed God and stayed close to the commands of God, God blessed them, watched over them, protected them. But the minute they left it was disaster to follow. Whenever man thinks he's smart enough to take care of everything, that's whenever he shows that that's not true. That is not true. Okay? The heart. Solomon said, guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. If our hearts are in danger, we must be careful and be wise. Sit back. Take a look. If something we want to get involved in, the question is, will it honor Christ or not? Okay? Will it honor Christ or not? So when I plan my vacation to go to Disney World, Lord, you can go with me. I'll buy your ticket so you can go. Okay? We're sitting and say, well, I'd really like to get a new car. And you know, Lord, I'll take people to church in it. I did that once, and I regretted that choice for a long time. We'll take the people to church in it. We rationalize the things that we want, and we try to tag it to the Lord. We'll use it for you, and it never works that way. But when the Lord blesses, and we're able to do something because of His blessings, that is a beautiful, beautiful thing. Okay? The heart. One more thing, and I promised to hush. Had a man in church, couldn't carry a tune in a bucket with a lid on it. But he loved to sing Amazing Grace. But that song came from his heart. It wasn't his voice. It came from his heart. And he would worship the Lord singing that song. And can we not all sing Amazing Grace with the reality that we once were lost, but now I'm found? Was blind, but now I see. And it's because the Lord reached down to us. What a life he had. And the Lord reached down to him. Okay. Stand with me, please. We have a couple verses of invitation.